You're listening to IceBreakers, the podcast exploring all things Canadian and Eurasian, business, culture, and personalities. The series is produced by CERBA, the Canada-Eurasia-Russia Business Association. We're a non-profit supporting trade, investment, and good relations between Canada and the countries of Eurasia. I'm your host, Nathan Hunt, one of the founders of CERBA and former chairman of the National Board. I invite you to tune in regularly for valuable insights relating to the region. Good day, everybody. We are privileged to have as our guest today a heavy decorated astronaut, engineer, pilot, and author, Colonel Chris Hadfield. Yes, that's the man who performed David Bowie's Space Oddity from the International Space Station. Colonel Hadfield's many awards include the Order of Canada, the Meritorious Service Cross, and the NASA Exceptional Service Medal. He was named the top test pilot in both the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Navy, and was inducted into Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame. He has flown 3 space missions, has helped to construct 2 space stations, and has performed 2 extravehicular spacewalks. He has crewed both the Space Shuttle and the Russian Soyuz spacecraft. And his crowning achievement, he commanded the International Space Station in the spring of 2013, the first Canadian to do so. I'm pleased to welcome today Colonel Chris Hadfield. Hello, Chris.
Hello, it is great to be joining everyone that's listening. I've lived all around the world. I lived off the world, as you mentioned, but I spent about 5 years living in Russia. And so it's wonderful to be able to reflect on that and what's going on and the new book that I've written and some of the stuff going on in the future. I've been looking forward to our conversation.
Well, we're looking forward to hearing about your book. I do have to mention that you are the first and only person who has sent me an email from outer space. So I carry that as a feather in my cap.
I'm glad to have that distinction.
There we go. Now, you grew up on a Canadian farm and we're told we're inspired to join the astronaut corps after seeing the Apollo 11 mission touch down on the moon in 1969. There have been, of course, hundreds of astronauts, but almost none, I have to say, in the modern age as well known as yourself. Did you ever imagine that you would become one of the best known astronauts, most sought after speakers and experts on space travel? Why did that happen? Are you an influencer? Do you think that's a fair term to use in your case?
Well, we're all influencers, but, it just kind of depends on how many people we influence. I think it actually stems from what you just asked. I watched how the space program of the 60s and 70s was shared with the world. And reflecting of different cultures, the Soviet program was kept very secret until something was complete. Cleaned version of it was presented to everybody. And when something went wrong, no one was told. So that's one way to talk about what you're doing. But the Americans did it differently. They just broadcast everything. And when the Apollo 1 crew was killed, or when Apollo 13 just about killed their crew of 3, or when Apollo 11 was so triumphantly successful, they just shared it with everyone. And it had enormous impact. There were more PhDs per capita in the United States in the 10 years after Apollo 11 than any time before or any time since. People saw themselves differently because of the inspiration of what some people were doing and exploring the universe. And I think I just sort of internalized that. If I ever get a chance to be one of the world's astronauts, I'm going to just try and share it every possible way I can. Writing music, performing music, videos, writing books, speaking all around the world, even talking to you today. So to me, it's just all part and parcel. There's also a responsibility. If you're trusted to go be a spaceship commander and funded by your own government, there is a public trust to not just squander it and keep it to yourself. So I think all of that fits together. And that's why I conduct life the way that I do.
Well, you've touched on the music portion. I have to say the word prolific comes to mind when we discuss Colonel Chris Hadfield. Have there been other musicians in space? I don't think anybody's recorded anything like what you did. I mean, that was just an amazing accomplishment.
Well, lots of astronauts and cosmonauts are musicians. And in fact, the Soviet space program in the 1970s and early 80s, they had guitars up on Salyut, and they actually transferred a guitar from Salyut 6 or 7 over to Mir, their space station that was launched in 86. And when I went and helped build Space Station Mir in 1995, that guitar was still there. And I brought up another guitar. So there's always, every explorer Think of hornpipes on a sailing ship or, whatever. There's all explorers have brought music with them. And that's true for people on board the space station. And I'm really looking forward to, as we settle the moon, how music is going to evolve in that entirely new environment, just like it's evolved in, New Orleans or the Bluegrass Mountains or somewhere. It becomes sort of a concoction of the local environment. So, yeah, music's everywhere, including the space station.
Well, I think we're a few generations away from any moon vibe, but, that could happen. That could develop. Who knows?
Coming faster than you think.
You're probably right. You're probably right. Now, I'm reading your rap sheet here. This is just astounding. You're a pioneer of many historic firsts. In 92, you were Canada's first fully qualified space shuttle crew member. In 95, on the shuttle Atlantis, you were the first Canadian to operate the Canadarm in space. You were the first Canadian to board and pilot a Russian Soyuz spacecraft, as you helped build the Russian space station Mir, as you have already alluded to. Afterwards, you spent 2 years in Russia as director of operations at the Yuri Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center in Star City. And 2013, as we've already mentioned, you commanded the International Space Station, the first and only Canadian ever to command any spaceship of any sort so far. That's very impressive. But few people know that you had to study spaceflight and aerodynamics in the Russian language. Is that right? Tell us a little bit about that experience. How did you learn Russian, and what was it like having to communicate on technical matters in such a foreign language?
Well, I think like a lot of people, I learned the language, Menya, zovut, Chris Hadfield, just like everybody. I'd learned to speak German reasonably and then learned to speak French. And I found Russian very difficult just because, unlike German and French, there's not a lot of overlap with English, not a lot of cognates. Speaking French and speaking English, you just sort of pronounce the word different, and it's almost always the same word, international, international, it's like just
Yep.
the accent right. But международный is nothing like international. And so, and of course, the alphabet is different, and the traditions and histories are different. So, and the very structure of, how you use cases and how you can be descriptive in an entirely different way. So I found it quite complex. I was hired as an astronaut, and then because Russia was being invited to be part of the International Space Station, I started studying Russian within a few months of being hired as an astronaut. And I studied Russian for 20 years. But on my first space flight, we helped build Mir. And then on my third space flight, I was the pilot of a Soyuz, or, for those in the know, у нас есть командир, в центром кресле, на левом кресле есть борт-инженер один. So the commander is sitting in the center seat, and on the left side is the flight engineer one. But essentially, that's like captain and pilot. And so I was the pilot of a Soyuz. And so, as you say, I had to study, orbital mechanics in Russian and all the control theory of the Soyuz spaceship in Russian, one-on-one with Yuri Manyak, a classic, extremely brilliant and focused chain-smoking instructor at Star City. And so my Russian is terrible, but it's good enough, to be able to fly a spaceship by myself if I needed to. And so I found it complex, but I also found it, obviously very enriching. To be able to speak some of the language allows you much more insight, and you get so much more out of daily conversation and just, being in Moscow or Petersburg or somewhere. So yeah, I think you should try and speak as many languages as you possibly can.
Well, that's for sure. I don't know that I'd want to have a taxi driver who read the taxi instructions in a language that he didn't understand well. So,
yeah, especially if the taxi went 25 times the speed of sound.
That would be a problem, yes.
Yeah.
On that note, you touched on the word traditions. I know that there's a tradition that you're supposed to watch the movie White Sun of the Desert in Baikonur before the launch. That's the Russian launch pad, which is, of course, in Kazakhstan. What are some of the other traditions, and where do they come from? Why is that?
Well, a lot of it is just human nature. And, cultures are different. The Russian culture from the original tribes, Rus and Tver, and the ancient history that people palpably have within themselves that we completely lack in North America. Canada was just sort of an instant country, granted nationhood by Great Britain. And so a lot of our traditions haven't developed yet, or we're just trying to sort them out as to which ones we should honor. And so as a result, we don't really put the same merit in it that I think older cultures do. But obviously, the Soviet or Russian space program was the first with Sputnik in 1957 and then Gagarin in 1961. And so the way that the people then prepared to launch Sputnik and then to launch the first human being, to launch Yuri in April of 61, that kind of established how we do these things. How do you not just mechanically get ready, but how do you psychologically get ready? How do you physiologically get ready? And so if Yuri decided he wanted to watch, Biele Solnce Pustini before launch, then, or, some of the subsequent cosmonauts did, then it's like, hey, those last guys did this. Let's do the same. Let's just sort of establish the norms. One of the things Yuri did, all the pomp and circumstance and politics and all the generals and everybody got to salute everybody, finally got on his bus to go out to his Vostok and go out to space. But anybody, obviously the standard tradition, sit quiet in your living room before you leave. But it's also a good idea to go to the bathroom. And with all of the stuff going on, Yuri realized, hey, no one budgeted me time to go to the bathroom. So he actually, when the bus went out of sight of where all of the generals and everybody was, coming in a low spot out there at Baikonur, he had them stop the bus and he jumped off and ran around, undid his pressure spacesuit and just took a leak, just peed on the tire. And,
good Lord.
So that became an instant tradition. And every single crew that has launched from Baikonur since then, self included, has stopped and peed on the tire. And for the women astronauts, where the plumbing is different, I know one at least, she just collected some of her urine in a little squirt bottle so she could come around and squirt her own urine on the tire, because traditions are important, and we wear a diaper underneath, so obviously we take care of the straight. Good Lord,
you guys are worse than baseball players.
Well, I'm not superstitious, but at the same time, traditions and methodologies, they're, you're girding for battle, you're getting yourself mentally and physiologically ready. And when I go out to fly an airplane, the things that I do beforehand get me into a different state, so I'm more capable. And so I recognize the necessity of traditions. And besides, it's good to launch with an empty bladder.
So tell me this. We understood that you refused NASA's offer of a nice townhome on the territory of Star City, that you and your wife opted instead to live with the people in a high-rise or a mid-rise somewhere in downtown Moscow, or was it in Korolev?
Yeah, the Russian space program, they have their headquarters right in Moscow, just on Olympijsky Prospekt, I think, or just off of it. And then the mission control, Center Upravlения Polyotami, the CUP, it's out in Korolev, as you say. But Star City, which is east of town, only, in traffic, only 4 hours away, it's where the cosmonauts live and work and train. And so I had Dom 2, the second building put together there at Star City back in the 50s. They have apartments for cosmonauts. And, Yuri Gagarin had an apartment there. And Valentina Tereshkova, she still has an apartment there. They had some where cosmonauts have passed away and their family didn't want it anymore. And so NASA rented one from the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center, and they had it available. And I thought, shoot, I'm in Russia. I don't need to live in a little American enclave. I actually want to have the experience and get to know my neighbors and see what it's actually like. And my wife and I are definitely of one mind on that. And so I lived there for, a couple of years. And it was great, beautifully insulated and very, family, and coming by the dejurny in the morning as she's downstairs watching the door, and all just the smells and the heat and the just how it all works, and the shutdown of hot water for a couple of weeks in the spring and all the rest of it. It's just normal life, and it just enriched the experience enormously. And besides, the buildings are very practically built for the climate of that part of the world. So it just, made good sense for a lot of reasons. And if I had the chance again, I would obviously do exactly the same thing.
Well, you talk about enriching. There's nothing more enriching than taking an ice cold shower when it's plus 10 Celsius outside, let me tell you.
Yeah, that's all right. I mean, it keeps you focused,
It really does. It really does. Well, those of us who lived in Russia, myself included, know the feeling. But anyway, you talked a little bit about the sights and smells. I'm going to shift gears. We want to talk about your book, but first I want to talk about life in space. What is it like in the International Space Station, living, the sights, the smells, personal hygiene, getting around. What is life like up there?
Nathan, getting around is the big change. You're weightless. And that sounds like just a word. What it actually means is you have now been granted a superpower. You can fly effortlessly. You are, Wonder Woman or an X-Man or Tinkerbell or whatever. You can fly. And it is wonderful being able to fly. It feels much more natural than having to walk everywhere, where gravity is the ultimate oppressor, always grinding you under its heel down into the dirt of the earth. To suddenly be able to fly effortlessly everywhere, you're just so graceful and elegant and acrobatic. And the space station, in order to stay in orbit, it's going at tremendous speed. It's going 8 kilometers a second, 17,500 miles an hour. So you whip around the entire world every 92 minutes. And that means you see entire continents, in the time it takes to drink a cup of tea, and, 10 minutes. And you cross North America in 10 minutes. So not only are you weightless and being, magnificent, but the whole world is rolling by in this glorious, beautiful, textured kaleidoscope out the window. And you're running 200 experiments. So there's an intense, really interesting purpose, and it's just overwhelmingly busy on board. And you have to exercise a couple hours every day. So we've got various types of weightless friendly exercise equipment to keep the muscles and bones strong. And it's just 7 days a week, 6 o'clock in the morning, my alarm would go off and you work till 10 o'clock at night. And then I would steal a couple hours of what was supposed to be scheduled sleep to do other things, write music and play the guitar and record videos and, write my family and get on social media and do stuff like that. If you watch movies about it, First Man or Ad Astra or something, it's always so grim and sad and everyone's all stern. It's nothing like that. Space flight is joyful and fun and hilarious. And you're there with a bunch of great people from all around the world. I don't know why the memes of media, Bowie's Space Oddity and Elton John's Rocket Man and other songs, they all use space as a metaphor for loneliness. They have it wrong. Space flight, you get to see everybody on Earth every day. It's just magnificent. And so I wanted to, share that with people now, but also during my whole experience also.
What does it smell like in the International Space Station? Give it to us straight, Chris.
On the space shuttle or on the Soyuz, it stinks like 3 people or 7 people that have been in a van for 7 days. It's with no real good bathing facilities. That's a small, very transitory type of transport vehicle. But the space station is huge and has a really good air circulation system and excellent filtration. 6 months up there, I didn't smell one other person. Even the 2 toilets on board, even on Earth, just go to any sort of public toilet. And, it's those ones just by Komsomolskaya there, those public toilets, that's pretty rank. But on board the space station, even if someone else had just come out of the toilet, not even a trace of smell of other people. It's got a terrific air handling system. And we need it, of course, because your lungs can't be counted on as the main air purifier of the spaceship. You need otherwise you'll slowly get poisoned, all the trace gases. So we have all sorts of really advanced air purification equipment. On Earth, we count on the trees and the grass and nature to do it for us. On the spaceship, it's mechanical. And so it smells pristine. It smells like maybe a really nice office building or a hospital or any place where you don't even think about the fact that there are no smells.
Interesting. You touched on the idea of a toilet. Do you actually have they invented a toilet that you can actually sit down on and do your business, or is it more complex than that?
Well, without gravity.
And we don't need too much detail here.
Without gravity, you don't need to sit. You never sit down for 6 months because there's no down, right?
Okay.
But
okay. All right.
And to pee, you just pee into a tube with a funnel. And the funnel, there's an adapter fits up against the body for the women. And it works fine. Just has a little air pulled into it so the urine goes down the tube. And then that water is collected in a sewage system, treated, recycled, centrifuged, filtered. And just like on Earth, that becomes our drinking water again. It's a little more personal up there because you know whose urine it was, but it's the same as on Earth. But the solid waste, we don't have an efficient way to recycle that yet. So you just sort of get strapped to it. It does look sort of like a toilet seat. And actually, it's made of wood, which is, kind of comforting. And you're just sort of strapped against it. And the solid waste comes out of your body. It's pulled down into the toilet by air instead of gravity. And then it's contained. The thing actually looks like a milk bottle. And when it gets full, it gets sealed up super tight so we don't get any of that smell on the ship. And eventually that becomes just part of our trash, part of our solid waste that every, month or two put in one of the empty ships like a Progress and it jettisons and burns up in the atmosphere. So the next time you're wishing on a shooting star going across the sky, you have to rethink what it actually may be burning up in the atmosphere.
It could be solid waste. Oh, dear.
It could be spaceship, astronaut solid waste, yeah.
They say solid waste happens. That's a nice euphemism. I'm going to remember that one.
Yeah.
So you're as I've already said, you're a prolific person. You're a musician. We all heard your performance of David Bowie. That was stunning. You're also an accomplished author. You wrote An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, and it has a subtitle. And you're coming out with a new thriller. It's your first foray into that genre, I believe. What can you tell us about the Apollo murders?
Sure. As a brief, shameless self-promotion, this is my first book, An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, which is just how to lead a better life. A book of images called You Are Here, a children's book that it's just sold all over the world called The Darkest Dark. And they've all been in multiple languages, including Russian and New York Times bestsellers. But this book, just out now, October 12th of this year is the release date. And it's my first time I've written fiction. And this is alternative history, thriller fiction. I set it in 1973. It's Apollo 18. And obviously the Cold War is going on. I was a combat pilot in the Cold War, so I'm very familiar. It's the American program. It's the Soviet program. The Soviets had a secret spy station at the time called Almaz, which was armed with a machine gun. That's all true. They also had Lunokhod driving around on the moon, a research vehicle operated out of Simferopol by a team down there in the Crimea. And that's all true. And both Almaz and Lunokhod mysteriously malfunctioned in the spring of 73. And that's all true. And so I interwove a plot of astronauts and cosmonauts and the U.S. system going through all of its Watergate, Vietnam mess, and the lack of ability because of the N-1 rocket for the Soviets to get to the moon and their follow-on programs and the Proton rocket, this thriller fiction. And like James Cameron, the guy who wrote, did all the movies, the most successful filmmaker in the world, he said just a barn burner of a book, couldn't put it down. Frederick Forsyth, who wrote The Day of the Jackal, he loved it. And Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian, he loves the book. I just can't believe the people that should know better that think it's a good book. So it's just now getting translated into 12 other languages already, besides English and French, and including Russian. A Russian.
I was going to say, hopefully Russian is in there. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to my Russian friends reading it, because in a lot of this type of book, the Russians just get cast. American media get cast as a bad guy. That's not the case in here. So anyway, but it's over half the characters are real people. And it's all technically just as right as an astronaut could make it. So I think you'll enjoy the Apollo murders.
Oh, fascinating. I get so fed up with Russians being the bad guys and the gangsters and the meanies in every film and book that comes out. So it's nice to hear that this sounds like there will be a refreshing change.
Yeah, I hope so. But what it really does is reflects reality. People do what they believe in and what they think they need to do. People do things for their own reasons. And whether they're, raised in a system in South Africa or Russia or Canada or the United States, they're somewhat a reflection of the culture where they're raised. And that's what motivates them. It's not evil and perfect. And obviously there are very bad people in every country and very good people. And so I think because I've lived in the United States and Canada and Russia and other countries, I think it's a little more reflective of the reality of people. And I think folks are going to find that to be a pretty accurate and fun part of the Apollo murders.
Now, did I understand you to say that the Almaz was that a machine gun was actually planted on the moon, or did I misunderstand that?
Almaz was a spy space station that orbited the world.
Okay.
And it was secret at the time, and it was kind of covered by the more publicly known Salyut program. But they were worried, obviously, about just like you put guns on a bomber aircraft. They were worried about self-defense, and they actually took a machine gun that was the tail gun of a Soviet bomber at the time and modified it and mounted it as the gun on the Almaz space station, and it was actually fired in space. And that's
it was really fired in space.
Yeah. And
amazing.
Yeah, the book, is incredibly grounded in real life. I put a section at the back called Author's Note, and it's just there, so you don't have to Google everything. You can actually find out that, Gabdullah Tipov is a real guy that drove, and the characters and who they were, and the space station and all this stuff, because the book is as absolutely real as I could make it. Because to me, those are the best alternative history fictions, where the thrill of the story is wrapped up in all of the things that really happened with real people and real events. And I think it makes the story really credible. In fact, James Cameron said, "The mission that never really happened, or did it?" Because Jim Cameron, he loves the book. Yeah. Anyway.
So some of these characters, by the way, if you're basing them on real people, some of them must still be alive. Are they aware that a book has been written about them, or is this going to be a surprise for them?
Well, I was worried about that, Nathan, because if I'm going to, have a living or any real person, aren't they going to sue me or
exactly.
arrest me or something? So I talked to my publishers just to check, a couple of years ago when I started writing the book, and they said no. Well, each country has their own libel and slander laws, so it kind of depends where the book's published. But so long as you're not, slanderous or libelous, if you're just putting dialogue sort of true to character into the mouths of people, then that's okay. But not many of, the character that drove Lunakhod on the moon, he's got a relatively significant part in the book, and it'll be a surprise to him, I think, to see himself brought to life. But in my case, I'm famous enough. You said I was an influencer. I'm enough of an influencer that I've shown up in all kinds of things. I'm in graphic novels and comic book novels. I'm a character in kids' books. I'm a character, all the time. And people write dialogue for me all the time. And I don't worry about it. It's just kind of, it's another way of recognizing the things that I've done and maybe helping other people to understand them and bring them to life. So I think this is sort of the same thing.
It's a compliment at the end of the day, isn't it?
Well, hopefully, if they wrote, if they turned me into a Spider-Man bad guy, I might want to take offense. But it's the reflective of who I am and what I've done, then, where's the harm?
Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, the Apollo Murders, and it's out the 12th of October, is what I heard you say, right?
Correct. Yeah, and it's out in print and digital if you like reading electronic book. I also got, I think, the best narrator in the world, a guy named Ray Porter. And he's the one who did, and he does accents. So his Russian accents are good. His Nixon is terrific. His Kissinger is really good. And he and I worked together a couple months ago for him to do the audiobook version. But, it's available worldwide here very shortly. It'll take a little longer for some of the other languages because they just have to put it through the translation. But it should be available by Christmas in, if that's a holiday folks celebrate, should be available by then in most places around the world.
Good Lord, Nixon, Kissinger, you've got the bases covered, Chris.
Yeah.
You've got everybody in this book.
Yeah, and, we got Khrushchev and Brezhnev and, all, because some Russian characters or Soviet characters that people don't even know. And inside Lubyanka as well, an interesting insight into real people and one imagined character inside Lubyanka and the KGB.
Now, do you have Gene Kranz, who was made famous in the Apollo 13 saga? The head of
Gene's a central character because he was one of the flight directors in Houston Mission Control for all of the Apollo flights. And so for this one, which is, it was a real Apollo flight, Apollo 18, but Nixon canceled it for financial reasons, and Apollo 19. But they built the rockets and they built the spaceships. He was afraid, Nixon was, after Apollo 13, the near fatal flight. He was afraid. He didn't want to have another flight where astronauts died or might die. And so he canceled Apollo 18 and 19. But even though the rockets were already built. And so, to interweave that, obviously Gene Kranz, if Apollo 18 had gone, he would have been one of the flight directors for it. So Gene has a very pivotal role in it. And my audio narrator, Ray Porter, he does a great Gene Kranz. You'll love it.
Oh, really?
And
Good
this is the first edition. It just came out. And so I sent a copy to all of the Apollo astronauts who are still alive, and also to Gene Kranz. So he has a first edition signed copy. And I hope he enjoys reading about himself in there too.
It sounds like we need to hear the audiobook. That seems to be the way to go.
Well, yeah, it depends. I often I will get the print book, but then I like getting the digital book so I can read it, on an airplane where I don't have to bring the book. But then if I'm busy, it's nice to be able to also listen to the audio. And I often go back and forth, while I'm running, I can listen to it. And then later when I can time, I can sit and read it. And I find a lot of folks are doing that. But yeah, like if you read Andy Weir's new book, it was Ray Porter, again, the same narrator. He just brings it to life in a different way. It's like a soundtrack for a movie. So there's advantages to all of them, I think. And I like all three, but I really love the audiobook because I think
Interesting.
It helps you imagine what I was trying to put into printed words.
Interesting. Now, you said that you believe Nixon canceled Apollos 18 and 19 because of fear that there was not a money saving. You're telling me the rockets were already built, so they actually didn't save that much money by canceling the missions? Is that what you're saying?
Correct. He was, well, part of it was financial. The Vietnam War was ending, and that had been just hugely politically complex and damaging. Watergate was just brewing. It was just rearing its ugly head. The events had already happened, but by the spring of '73, Haldeman, who's in the book, and Nixon and their team, they knew what was about to happen, or at least they could feel the fearful back of the neck hairs. And so all of that was going on. But something you don't know, Nathan, I'm sure, is that when the space shuttle was originally conceived, and that was under Nixon as well, obviously they had to trade off monies for that too, but he didn't have enough money in the budget for NASA to be able to fund the space shuttle. He had to go to the US Air Force and get them to contribute part of their budget. And so they got to dictate how the space shuttle was designed. And it was designed to launch out of California, get to orbit, have two astronauts go outside, grab a Soviet satellite, pull it inside the shuttle, come around and land after one orbit. That was a basic design criteria driven by the US Air Force at the time in the 70s. And those papers were recently declassified. And so when you read the plot of the Apollo murders, it's not fanciful at all. This is what was going on. This is what was driving a lot of the decision making within what has now become, Space Command, and then recently renamed as the Space Force. That was all getting its start there at the end of the Apollo program and the start of the shuttle program. And Nixon had to try and balance all those things. But part of it was just, fear of looking bad. And people are just human. People make their decisions for lots of different reasons. And that was definitely one of them that was in his mind.
Interesting. I'd never heard that. Was it difficult to adjust to life in gravity after being weightless for so many months, or is that easy?
No, it's really tough. After half a year without gravity, your body adapts, and you could close your eyes. Anybody who's watching this, close your eyes and you immediately know where up is. And you can feel, either if you're sitting down, you can feel yourself being lifted by your rear end, or if you're standing and feel it on the soles of your feet. Your balance system is super attuned. And when you open your eyes, it matches, what your inner ear and all your other senses are saying, and your eyeballs match. But when you get to weightlessness, your eyeballs say, hey, you're in a room and this way's up. But your balance system says, I have no idea. And so your body's super confused, and it makes you nauseous for the first few days. But then after a while, your body says, okay, disregard the balance system. You're completely visual now. So when you get back to Earth and there's gravity again coming through your inner ear, your body is once again all in tumult, and it makes you want to throw up because it thinks, what could have caused an instantaneous disconnect between what you feel and what you see? And for the last 100 or 300,000 years, the only thing that could have caused that instantaneous change was if you'd eaten some sort of bad mushroom or hallucinogen, right? And so your body's saying, hey, this thing's killing you, throw up right now, or you're going to die of some neurotoxin. So your body makes you want to throw up. So initially you're very nauseous, and your body says, now that you've thrown up, go to sleep, because we got to slow down how fast you're metabolizing this. And so you come back nauseous and wickedly tired. That's how you feel at the start. And your balance system doesn't work. If you stand up, you look like the worst kind of drunk. You're going to fall over.
Good Lord.
But that fades over a day or two. And then after a week or two, you can walk sort of normally. After a couple weeks, they let you drive a car again. But it takes a couple weeks. Running took like 4 months for me until running felt normal again. Because a lot of stuff's happening quick when you're running. But then when you actually look at my endocrine system, bone density and the actual balance of all the chemicals in my body, that took about 1.5 years to get back to a pre-launch.
Oh, wow.
So 6 months, 18 months, about 3 to 1. So if you go to space, it'll take you about 3 to 1 for your body to recover. And there's a lot of rehab, but it's infinitely worth it, Nathan. I mean, flying in space is the coolest thing I could possibly imagine, and definitely the coolest things I've done in my life. And so a little bit of rehab afterward. You know, it's like you have a great night, and so the next morning you don't feel so good. You know, it's the price you got to pay.
I remember you telling in the Canadian Embassy, we had you as a speaker, and you telling the story of you had to pass a book to somebody immediately after you landed, and in space you passed the book by simply shoving it towards the person, and you had done that on the ground. Do you remember that story?
Yeah, it was during my first space flight, and we landed. And it was not a book, but a videotape. And Jerry Ross, who's flown in space more than any other shuttle astronaut, he flew 7 times on the shuttle. But he was doing a little videotaping of our landing, and he wanted to hand me the videotape. And we'd just gotten back from space, and he like floated it to me, and I went and fell on the ground. And both of us were like a bad, Japanese Godzilla movie. We're like, looking down at the ground and then trying to bend down and not fall over and pick it up. And that was a flight that was only 8 or 9 days. So after 6 months, it's even more exaggerated.
Oh, unbelievable. Unbelievable. Now, by the time this is produced, this episode that we're recording, the film crew that's at the ISS will have returned. They're up there right now as we speak. Something for Russian TV, as I believe. The U.S. is talking about sending Tom Cruise up to film an American film at the ISS. Are we witnessing another space race between Russia and the U.S.?
No.
Are we at the point where it's time to start sending non-astronauts into space on a regular basis?
To call that a space race is silly, but I think it's wonderful that we have made spaceflight safe enough and therefore simple and cheap enough that now you can start getting to the point where it can be accessible to people that couldn't get there before. In order to fly in space, historically, you had to be a trillionaire. You had to be a nation. Nobody else could afford spaceflight. And then cost has dropped over time. The space shuttle was incredibly expensive to fly on, but we still took basically a few unqualified people up. We took a couple politicians up, and we took a school teacher up, and then she died because, it was way too soon to be taking passengers on board a spaceship. You need everybody to be competent. But that was a long time ago, and we've learned a lot. And with the new vehicles, like the Soyuz that just launched with only one competent person on board and 2 passengers, Anton Skleperov is the cosmonaut. But the vehicle started out really primitive, the Soyuz, when it was first built. But now it's all digital, and it becomes reasonably safe for one person to be able to fly the thing all the way up and all the way down. So that opens up new opportunity. It may be too early, like we were with Krista McAuliffe, but they got to station okay, and hopefully, we're just filming this now, but hopefully they'll get back okay. On the American side, SpaceX has built a vehicle that is so safe that in September, 4 people flew to space and stayed there for almost exactly the same amount of time as Valentina Tereshkova, 3 days, 50 times around the world. And none of them are professional astronauts. One was a pilot, at least, so he had some idea what he was doing. But with almost no training at all, that spaceship safely took care of 4 people for 50 orbits of the world. So that opens up, so long as you can get the cost down low enough, that opens up huge opportunity. But look at the cost of making a blockbuster movie. It's often hundreds of millions of US dollars to make a blockbuster movie. And so if you can get the cost of spaceflight down low enough, it just becomes one more set that you can go film on, kind of cool. And it gives it sort of a cachet. It's still really early days, and I don't know when Tom Cruise is going to fly, maybe fairly soon. But the fact that there's a Russian film crew up on the International Space Station, cool. They're the first to do it. I mean, there was a Japanese journalist who flew to Mir in the early 1990s. So, it's not that much new. So, it's getting there. But to me, it's just an indicator of how far we've come and how safe spaceflight is and how much the cost is coming down. And it's continuing to plummet with the new vehicle that SpaceX is building and launching out of Texas. So I think it's a really good, important trajectory. And these commercial applications of it, they're just reflections of how good it is now.
You talked about flying up with one Soyuz pilot and 2 passengers. I remember the airplane movies and Sandra Bullock in Gravity. Could one of those passengers actually land the Soyuz if they had to, with instruction from Mission Control?
If nothing breaks, the Soyuz lands itself. You don't have to do a thing.
Really?
But things break all the time. It's like most machinery. You don't need people unless something's going wrong. But, if you look at a few years ago, an airplane took off out of New York, and it went through a flock of geese, and a goose went down each engine and destroyed both engines. And the skill of that pilot, he saved every single life on board. If it had been a machine flying the airplane, everybody would have died. We would have lost hundreds of lives. So it's when things are working perfectly, you don't need human intuition and judgment and skill and cunning. It's when things go wrong. So the Soyuz can fly itself, just like a Progress, because that's kind of an unmanned Soyuz. But when things go wrong, that's when you need at least one qualified person to do the right things. And that's why Anton's there. And if Anton got appendicitis or something, we'd have to put somebody else competent in that seat to bring the passengers home.
Yeah, miracle on the Hudson. Who could forget it?
Yeah.
Amazing, amazing day. What is it, Chris, that made you a leader? Tell us in 30 seconds or less.
We need leadership when things are going wrong. And so what made me a leader was a desire to make the most of myself and to be competent and skilled enough that when my turn came, I could have the greatest chance possible of making the right decision to be able to help a group of people as best I possibly could. I studied it my whole life. I learned from other leaders, but it's fundamentally the need and the set of personal skills. That's what made me a leader.
Fascinating. And what does the future hold for Colonel Chris Hadfield? Where do you see yourself in 2025, 2030?
I'm writing a sequel to the Apollo murders right now. So I've enjoyed writing, thriller fiction. So there'll be another book. I help run several space companies. I'm an advisor to SpaceX. I'm on the advisory board of Virgin Galactic. I help run Momentous. Working there, I teach at the University of Waterloo. I help run a big technology incubator. I run the whole space stream of that called the Creative Destruction Lab. I run a space foundation that's looking at settlement laws as we start to settle on the moon. And that's happening much sooner than you think. And what are property rights and how are we going to set up a geopolitical system as we start to settle other planets and other orbiting bodies? So I'm the chair of the board of that foundation. And when Bowie's band starts touring again, I tour with Bowie's band and play a little bit of music. I speak all over the world. I did a master class that I think folks have found really interesting here during the pandemic. And I'm always looking for new challenges and new things. And I've done several TV series. I did a BBC series and I did a National Geographic series. So there may be something like that still in the works. And I like to exercise every day and share what I'm doing. So I got a full plate and they all keep me entertained and busy. And they really make me eager to start every single day.
Well, good for you. Now you're talking about property rights on the moon. I did buy on the internet a crater for my wife, and I have a certificate saying that it belongs to me. Are you saying that I may lose that in the future?
You don't own it. It's named maybe for your wife, and that's okay because we have to name things. But if you go to the Outer Space Treaty, which is the current governing legal document signed by all the various appropriate members through the United Nations, it pretty clearly delineates that you and your wife don't own that crater on the moon. But until we actually get there and start finding things of value, there's probably a lot of rare earth elements, and there may be some. And you'll see in the Apollo murders actually how that rare elements on the moon unfold. But until we actually test the system, who can enforce the laws? If Elon Musk goes to the moon and starts digging and bringing back things of value, who can stop him? Who's going to enforce the laws? Whose laws do we follow? Do we just take a little China and a little Russia and a little United States and a little India and a little Japan and a little United Arab Emirates and just take our currently flawed geopolitical mosaic and just transpose that onto the moon. That would be stupid, but hopefully, like in Antarctica, hopefully we can get a different model. And I think it's a historical time in history to address it. And that's why, I chair the foundation, and why my folks are doing great work there. They're not my folks, I'm their chair, but they're doing superb work at the Open Lunar Foundation in order to try and work on just that issue. And it also allows us to rethink our political systems on Earth, which is kind of another backwards and useful way, and useful result of exploration.
Well, it's been fascinating. It really has been a pleasure to speak with you, Chris. I never will forget the talk you gave to us at the Canadian Embassy. Gosh, it must have been 15 years ago or more. We have been privileged today to have as our guest the decorated astronaut, engineer, pilot, and author, Colonel Chris Hadfield. Thank you so much for joining us today, Chris.
Hey, thanks very much, Nathan. It's a privilege, and I very much look forward to my next trip to Moscow. It's my favorite city on Earth for a lot of good reasons. Thanks for having me in today.
Well, I hope you'll find time for lunch with me.
I would love it. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to IceBreakers, the podcast produced by CERBA, a nonprofit business association supporting trade, investment, and good relations between Canada and the countries of Eurasia. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe to the show and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. You can join our LinkedIn group to send questions to guests and find more information about the podcast series in general on our website at www.serbanet.org. Thanks for tuning in.